The Healing Spring Show, healing families and communities by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmondson.
Welcome back to the Healing Spring Show. I'm glad to see everybody here today, and we have a gift for you today, a special treat for you, an international presenter, author, and the creator of ETT, Emotional Transformation Therapy. Therapy that happens the speed of light. Let's learn more about it. Dr. Vazquez, Thank you for being on the show today.
Great to be here.
Yeah, glad for you to be here. So tell us about you. You're an author. You travel the world talking about this technique. Let's start with, what does ETT mean?
Okay. We picked the phrase emotional transformation therapy because it actually means that. It means that your emotions, for example, can start at a swing of very low to very high. It's not just about getting over something bad, but it actually takes you to a place of a very high state often. So it transforms in a short period of time. Two characteristics of transformation: the speed at which it changes things and the degree to which it changes things. And transformation was a word I selected that captures that, I think.
That's powerful. So you're saying the emotional transformation, it's not just self-regulation, it's actually you're making an actual shift in somebody through the experience.
Correct. So many times they leave chuckling when they start crying at the beginning. So that is a transformation.
It's a shift, and a powerful one for sure. Now, I've heard that you've trained people on this or demonstrated this technique all over the world. Where were some of the places you've been?
I've taught in Europe, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, Germany primarily. I even taught in Australia. I taught one time in Japan. That was a real test because I got to see how the visual stimulation we use affected people from a totally different culture. And so it was delightful to see how that would work, but mainly in the United States. And so wherever we get invitations, we'll try to teach it there.
Yeah, and I bet they love having you. How did you pull it off across seas? Was there a translator or?
In some cases, like in Germany, although they could speak English, they wanted a translator. So in many cases, I had a translator, and it was an interesting thing to do therapy where the person's saying something, and then when I talk back, the translator comes in between, and then I talk back, and so forth. So, but after a while, it gets to be a rhythm, and it seems to work as though the translator's not even there after a while. Anyway, that's been a pleasure.
And you said something which I think is key, is there's a kind of a rhythm to this experience. So I'm coming in the door and I have stress and I don't know what the stress is about, and I come see you. What do I do? What happens?
Like any counselor, I'll do an intake, background information, get an idea of who you are and what the extent of the issues are, your objectives are. That's pretty standard. But from there, it deviates. From there, I will want to expose them to one of our processes to see how they respond. We have one process we use with the spectral chart where it has this unique propensity to detect when people are disengaging from their emotions. They don't even realize it. The research says that 46.9% of the time, our mind is wandering on the average. So in normal counseling, the person's not with you half the time. And so we use a process that helps detect when that's occurring, the moment it occurs, so we can get their full attention focused. And it's amazing how you can work through things if your mind is fully engaged on what we're talking about.
So it's almost like you have to be present in order to win. You have to be in the room to heal.
You have to be, but it sure helps it. It speeds up the process dramatically. Because, most counselors are still out there talking to the clients, assuming that their brain is fully engaged with their emotions. And, the research says they're not half the time. So we want to make sure we can optimize it that way.
And it's very powerful. So if I was going to give full disclosure to the audience, I'm trained in ETT through Dr. Vazquez and used it when I worked in drug treatment and education and individual sessions. And that's why I'm so excited to have him on the show, because I've seen this firsthand, what can happen, how it can change, somebody's life right in front of your eyes. And being trained, we have to go through the process of seeing you and having our own therapy, which is powerful to see that shift. We're not going to talk about that on the show. But I want to walk them through some of the experience, because we have this at Healing Springs. You've been training all of our clinicians, getting them on board, ready to go. Every room has a chart in it. We're doing research on it now, so it's exciting. Where did you first learn how to do all this? How did this wonderful thing get created?
Well, there's a series of events that happened in my life that led me to exploring this. Probably the very earliest was when my daughter was about 6 or 7 years old. She was... I read her story, hoping that she would go to sleep. Of course, those of you that are parents know that they don't go to sleep after you've read them a story. Sure. So she asked me to come back and leave the light on for about 20 minutes to come back and check on her. So I came back in the room, and she was had a look of awe on her face, and I asked her what happened. And she said that she was laying down watching the ceiling light, and she found herself going into this tunnel, into this place of light, and she saw two people and her pet cat who had deceased, and she got a closure to each one of those losses in 20 minutes. So that stunned me. How could that happen? What does the light have to do with it? And I actually didn't do anything professionally with it for some time, but in the back of my mind, I knew that looking at the light somehow can affect your emotions. A decade or two later, I gradually began to see some optometrists that were using colored light and, read different things, and I gradually began to experiment with it in the early 1990s, and it was trial and error. I began to notice that certain wavelengths of light would affect people in a quite profound way. Probably one of them was a woman that had arthritis, pain for 15 years. Her hands were gnarled, and she was continuously in pain. So I exposed her to different lights, and nothing happened until I got to orange, and it just stopped. Her pain stopped. Well, at that point, I knew something was powerful, but I didn't know how that happened or why it would. It took me many years to develop that. We now know, scientific research has told us now, that when you look at color, whatever you're thinking at the time you're looking at the color, your thought process is affected. And as your thought process changes, the perception of the color appears to change. And the same thing with emotions. When you're in a certain emotional state and you look at a specific color, it will affect the emotional state, and the emotional state will affect your perception of that color. Same thing with language. This is why we get people to talk. As you're talking about something, as you're looking at a particular color, the color will affect your language, and your language will affect the perception of the color. And
so you're saying that just looking at a light can change how you feel?
Well, it's not quite that simple. I would say that it has to do with, you can find precise lights and colors that have a greater impact. A lot of people know that, for example, interior design people make a living trying to develop color to set up the mood states in certain homes and so forth. People in business spend millions of dollars on packaging and information about color that will help sell their products. So the business people have been doing this for some time. Millions of dollars has been spent on what colors pills should be made that will cause people to take certain pills and have certain effects. So that's been in that area for a long time, but it really hasn't been used as a therapeutic process that much until I came along. And and it's not just any color, it's what is the state of mind you're in while you're viewing a specific one. And the other strength is that it can elicit what we call implicit memory, memories that are not conscious to you, that are relevant to a certain issue. It can bring those to the surface so that you have a chance at that. For example, in trauma and addictions particularly, the parts of the brain involved in changing those conditions are implicit or buried. They're not conscious to the person.
Hidden to even the person.
So, research shows that conscious verbal dialogue won't change it for the most part. You can tell you, don't take that drug, okay? Is it going to work? Those of you who dealt with addictions know that it's not that simple. But if you can get to the underlying factors, if they emerge about what is the source or the template to that, then you can change the thing by changing sort of the blueprint to the addiction. I would say a little bit more about that. The method I use is called the addictive template model, and it's designed to get the underlying causes that cause the addiction in the first place that people aren't conscious of, and that's very difficult to get to through most therapy, and that's why it takes so long normally, because it just doesn't reach that part of the brain. And so if you can access it quickly, you have very dramatic changes.
And it's that idea of if you can reveal it, you actually reveal it, you can heal it. And it's amazing what you're saying, and it's so true. I bet most of us don't even think about this. When we look at TV shows, the color they're using, maybe for their background, is to affect the mind, or going into a discotheque, probably, the lights they choose, and a way to affect people. We part of that, every product, every box. So let's do a quick experiment here real quick. I wonder if can we change the lighting in the room to see what's different? So, Dr. V, can you tell us pick a color. What would you choose?
Let's pick orange.
Orange. Can we have orange on the set?
Got any orange?
It's coming. Let's see here. Is orange coming? Shifting. We got white. We got blue. We have to talk about blue in a second. Yeah, he's going through each one. I think we're going to catch it here in a moment. So as we look at this, here it comes. So what does orange do normally? I'm sure it varies from person to person. What does orange do to affect someone?
If you have a negative self-perception, orange will probably make you feel worse, at least initially. If you have a positive perception, you're going to like orange. However, when it makes you feel worse, it begins to bring up things that aren't conscious to you. And as therapists, that's an advantage, and we can do something with that. I had one cocaine addict I worked with that he said, orange is better than any cocaine I've ever had. That's what he said, because we used it extensively for his particular issue. Shame, lack of self-worth, those kinds of issues it's particularly valuable for. But of course, there's a whole training about how to do it effectively and precisely. Let me just say that how it works essentially is when light comes into your eyes, the photosensitive cells in your eyes translate it into neural impulses that go throughout the entire brain. And so this is a way to get to certain parts of the brain that you wouldn't get to otherwise. And by using specific wavelengths of light, we can target specific brain mechanisms while the person is talking, is in that experience. Not just looking at a light by itself doesn't do it. It's a combination of going through a particular experience and getting the light exactly correct. I'm talking about to a single point of light. We're not talking about just blue in general, but there's specific blue that will affect you. We have equipment that allows you to get to that specific one.
It's that precise. It has to be that one. So
optimally, yes.
Optimally. So you said orange has to do with self-esteem.
Self-perception.
Self-perception.
So that because it could be about a negative self-perception or a positive one, but those issues are often associated with that color.
So each color has its meaning and its emotion to it.
Yes.
So if you're watching right now and you're having challenges with self-perception, then maybe you need to come on in. Or if you're feeling really great right now, then you might be okay. What's another color we can look at?
Well, there's some unique ones that have very specific effects. For example, there's an indigo color that we have that is particularly good in addictions. We get people with extreme craving states. If we get the exact right wavelength of light, within 10 minutes, it neutralizes. I'm talking about physical symptoms, craving to the max. I just worked with a guy the other day, smoking, and he did methamphetamine, and he was a sex addict as well. So we did this work, and as I use that, there's other things we have to do first, but when I get to that particular wavelength for the craving, it neutralized in about 10 minutes. I'm dealing with heroin addicts, with addicts of a variety of types. And it's just hard to believe until you actually see it. But I do live demonstrations in my training. I bring in a heroin addict that's actively seeking and craving it, and we neutralize the craving in about 10 minutes. Now, that doesn't last long term unless it's done in a sequence where we've gotten some of the underlying template to the addiction completed first, and then you have a long-term effect. And so you don't have to beg them to quit doing it. You don't have to try to talk them into it. You don't have to yell at them for them doing whatever drug they did. You just have them on a particular line, ask them to talk about this. In AA, is called stinking thinking, irrational thoughts that they have about this. And for example, cigarette addicts will just say, well, we're all going to die sometime. I mean,
they rationalize it.
Rationalizing,
it's just one drink.
But so we do this process, and they begin to come to their senses, because in the brain, the part of addiction that's affecting is the orbital frontal cortex, just above and behind the eyes, and that's where your decision making is the primary function of it. And when your decision making goes out the window, you're going to make judgment mistakes. And in addictions, it standardly doesn't function well. And that particular wavelength causes it to function better.
So it improves it. And so as we have the show, we have so many different people that come on, Dr. Vazquez, and it's a lot of people who, from multiple forms of therapy and treatment. And there can always be this, well, I think my way is better, yours. You're actually just kind of saying this is a really effective on you seeing yourself. But the part where a lot of people can come together and agree and connect on this, as you're saying, what even AA says, is you have to get to that underlying issue. And if you don't get to that underlying issue, it's really not going to go away. Or maybe you stay sober, but you stay very unhappy.
Yeah, it puts you at a higher risk for relapse.
A higher risk to do it.
And so getting the template or blueprint to it is vital, but it's very hard to get to without proper tools.
And do you think, a lot of people on the show, they talk about how addiction isn't just drugs and alcohol. With the way that you work with it, how do you define or how do you look at addiction?
Well, first of all, I have to screen them to see if they are an addict or not. And but there's a lot of salient characteristics. I asked a woman that she was wondering if she was addicted to caffeine. And I said, well, you drink coffee in the morning? She says, yes. I said, well, could you do without it for a week? And she says, I'm addicted. Because it was clear she couldn't. In fact, caffeine is literally the number one addiction worldwide over anything else, as far as numbers are concerned, caffeine. So they can be legal or illegal, but still it's the addictive quality. And if you're using a legal substance, and that's fine, but it sort of makes you more susceptible for other addictions. It's well known that in AA, people would smoke a lot to compensate from not drinking. Well, that sort of keeps the addiction at a high risk to do that. One addiction can cross over to another one. And so you can replace it with something legal, but there's still an addiction. And what we want to do is change that addiction neural network in the brain. That was discovered in the year 2000, what that is. And that's what I do different. I target the brain mechanisms in what's called the addictive neural network, or the reward deficiency syndrome, which was identified in the year 2000. But to my knowledge, very few people have done anything with that. But our whole process is focused on changing those specific brain mechanisms.
So you're saying it's not really about the substance. It's involved, sure, but you're saying it's more about the brain.
No, they go together. What happens is, let me give you an example. Let's say I come home from work, I'm tired, stressed out. So I think, I'll drink some wine. Have a glass of wine, relaxes me, it's good. And that's fine until a few days later I'm stressed out again. And so I drank wine again. All right? And then over time, it goes to 2-3 glasses of wine. It goes every day. It may take months or whatever to get to that point. But then you can't relax without it. It's dependent. You're dependent on that for the relaxation. So it sneaks up on you subtly in that way before you realize you're addicted, and most people don't even recognize it. That's one of the big problems with it. But you get your pleasure from that, and you lose how to gain pleasure and how to relax without it after a period of time. And so there's nowhere else to go but the substance.
Go right back to it.
Yeah.
So then it's a self-defeating cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So I create a problem, the problem creates a problem, and I go back to the problem again to get help.
And what's worse, let's say you and your wife were having this wine, and one person is not susceptible, but the other is. Mm-hmm. By doing it every night, it's a different story for another person. So addiction, some people get caught in it more easily than others. In that particular case, if you have a background where you're not very well developed on how to manage your emotions, you're going to be more susceptible to use something else to help you manage them. But if you have a background that's not set up that way, you're less susceptible. So this is why some people get addicted and others don't. I mean, there's more reasons to it than that, but that's part of it. So anyway, do you have other questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking of some. So as we're looking at it, I'm thinking about this chart we have behind us. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you're a client of Healing Springs, you've had ETT therapy, you know what that is. But people who are watching, they're wondering, what's that chart about?
Well, this chart happened. Tell you how I developed it. I was teaching in Germany, and I had one day off. So I always wanted to go see this well-known castle there. So I get on a train in Germany by myself. I can't speak German. And in the train station, each train station, when you stopped in Germany, it was close, the glass window was close to the wall. And each train station in Germany at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, was painted an entirely different color. One train station would be red, the next one would be blue, the next one would be yellow. And so I was distressed at that time, and so I would look out the window at each train station at each different color and think about this issue that was disturbing me. And by the time I got to the destination, I was euphoric because it had all released. And so I discovered it that way. And then I found the spectral chart that is unusual because it brings out the colors to the maximum level. In other words, yellow may not affect you much, but it may affect you on this chart because it's the most pure yellow you can get. And so I figured if I could get the heightened, saturated yellow of each color, that I could, it might have a greater effect. And sure enough, it does. So that's a little bit about the development of how I got there. First it worked on me, and then I had to find the optimal color that is just as bright and clear as it could be.
And so how would that work if I'm looking at this chart and I'm talking to you? So the first question, I think a lot of people, they may hear this and go, this is about colors. Mm-hmm. But what would happen? They're sitting in the room with you. What would be the experience?
I would ask them to talk about whatever issue that's disturbing them as they look at a specific color, and maybe even look at it at different angles to the right and to the left. And then as we go through another color, I ask them to talk about the same thing. And often the emotional tone will shift as they look to a different color. The next color, they may be more agitated. Then the next color that I shift them to, they may be more sad. So you'll see that the color affects the emotional state. And once I get an idea of which color affects them in what way, then I can custom tailor it to that person. We have what's called resource colors, some colors that they feel really good on, and they feel naturally relaxed and so forth. So if we're in trouble, I can take them to that resource color if they're too distressed. But actually, we want to go to the distressing emotions as much as we can so we can completely transform them, turn those around. So what happens, what's unique with this, that I don't know anything else that does it, is the colors will appear to distort when the person's losing their engagement with their own emotions. And so this chart helps me know if they're engaged, fully engaged, and when they are, it works better because they can process the emotion much more quickly.
It's almost like a real-time feedback.
Yep, absolutely. It's almost instant, too.
Yeah, which would make more powerful. That would make therapy quicker because you actually, the moment you know when they're present, you know when they're not. Is there a color, as we can adjust our show here, is there a color that creates a sense usually of maybe faith and hope? I'm sure people would want to ask that.
I wish there is, but it's very different from one person to the next. Yeah, that's why we do the assessment and check them out, how they respond to each one. There's not a good color or spiritual color or a better color. It varies. I used to think that, for example, the indigos and the violets would be more calming, but some people don't have that experience. So we have to first assess that before we know.
Oh, so they can't just say, because I've seen a lot of books out there, they say color therapy. And they say, okay, well, I guess, okay, purple is always this, green is always that, yellow is always this. And I'm guessing there is a theme, but then it's going to vary from each person. So maybe...
For example, if your best friend was in a car wreck with a blue dress and she was hit by a blue car, and you've had a lot of associations with blue that are negative, your response is going to be very different with blue than somebody else's. And so you actually, part of it can be learned. You can learn by association. When people look at blue, some people often talk about the ocean, but others don't. And so we have to see what their associations may be.
This is something people really have to get trained about, really have to connect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and are we, someone I'm sure is going to ask the question, are we throwing therapy out the window then? Are we no longer talking to people? Are we just showing them lights?
The foundation is interpersonal. It's an interpersonal form of therapy. You don't just do it by yourself for the most part. The person is talking, and what happens is the scientific research has shown that the single most important factor in all of therapy is the therapeutic bond. So we still believe that's highly important, but we're bringing something else into it, and that's visual brain stimulation simultaneously while the bond is there and while they're talking about their emotional distress. And that simultaneous conversation becomes very elevating and very transformative. So no, we're not just turning them over, go look at colors and you'll feel better. We still have the therapeutic process. They have to trust me enough to do it to start with, and feel comfortable enough with me to disclose what's going on. And then they have to be willing to cooperate with the process to look at the specific colors we need. And sometimes it's not just this color, it's really specific wavelengths of light, because we have a light device we use that there's like 255 degrees of red. So we want the exact one that's going to impact them the most. And this is general. This chart is general. It has the specific colors, but I say we have another means that is much more specific than that. And because there's so many variations, the client themselves often cannot see the color accurately. There's a thing that's pretty well known that you're looking at one color for a while, and then you look at another. The first one affects how the second one looks. So that has to be thought about and factored in when you're talking about it.
And adjusted a little bit. So we have a couple of things on the table I want to talk about. There may be some success stories that you mentioned before. They asked me that coming in. They asked about the chart, so I'm glad we talked about that. When I put that on the table, a lot of the film crew were like, what in the world are those goggles over there? If I walked into a therapy session, I'd have a question mark.
Yes.
So how does that work?
I discovered some time ago that allowing a tiny bit of light into the periphery of the eyes affected the brain quite profoundly. Sometimes like this bright color chart or the light device are a little overstimulating for sensitive people. And so we have some other choices. This actually blocks out light. So you see much less light, and it has a rotating disc that allows a little bit of light to come in one specific angle. And so we research which angle affects each person. And it's rather dramatic for emotions and for physical pain. They may have physical pain while the light is entering at 3 o'clock, the sides of the periphery of the eye. And then we go to 9 o'clock and boom, there's no pain. I mean, it can change that fast. So I know this sounds too good to be true, but that's how it works. And the periphery is a whole different pathway in the brain where we can access what people call parts. A lot of psychotherapy, starting with Sigmund Freud, talked about the id, the ego, and the superego. There's different theories about different parts. Well, each peripheral position seems to access a specific part within a person. For example, you may have a party self, and you may have a sad self. And each peripheral position can bring out each of these different parts of you in that way, psychological parts.
Just by changing the light, just by changing how maybe one is going in. Can I see it for a second? Because I'm looking at it, make sure we can see it on the camera. So if you're looking at this, it's almost got like a clock dial on it. And so as you turn it, it's allowing the light to come in different ways. So maybe it's here, or maybe coming from the top. And so you're saying, like, if I have it here, maybe everything's at 12 o'clock and 12 o'clock, that just putting that on and wearing it and the light coming in could actually shift how someone feels. Emotional states and physical states. The shift is pretty dramatic to people. And it's been thought that there's the right brain and left brain hemisphere that is affected by it. But this is all the way around, 12 positions like you have on a clock. And we find that each one is a little different. And sometimes we can find some powerful, positive resources. Certain positions, for example, can make you feel hope where you didn't feel that before. And it's so odd that something that gentle can be that strong. And basically, people don't believe it until they've tried it. That's pretty good for people that have high sensitivity, and maybe the light device is too strong for them, or the color's too much. So we have some other options here. But this is particularly good for when people have overwhelm. It's as though we can divide it up into one segment at a time. And overwhelm is a common issue in therapy, and this process, the goggles are particularly good for that, breaking down overwhelm into little smaller pieces. Yeah, just like one little glimpse at a time. Yeah. And you said something a couple of times I wanted to earmark it. Definitely, you talked about working through the underlying issue, the trauma, how we're still doing regular therapy, but we're augmented with all these really different objects in the room and the light stimulation. Mm-hmm. And then you said we're also resourcing. So it's not just dive on into something and go into the challenge. You're actually saying first we're going to resource them. We don't necessarily do it in that order. First, when you do assessing, you do an assessment, you find out where is it they're most activated and where they're most positive, and then you can have that to work with it, to individualize it with each person. For example, somebody red makes them feel wonderful. Everything else makes them feel awful. Okay? Well, you can work through the awful stuff, and it's really nice to, at the end of the session, use the color that feels the best to them so they can at least leave completed. So that's one way you could do it, for sure. Now, all this is on top of a good relationship with the client. They're not going to do much of anything with you unless you have that. So that's a foundation. Yeah, connection is the key. So in a little while, we're coming to a close. Can we end on the orange color, by the way? Can we bring that one back? So we end on the first one. I felt pretty good when I was feeling that. I'm hoping everyone else feels good looking at this color. If not, we'll see about how to find Dr. B here in a minute. Before we officially end, is there another thing that you think people need to hear just in general from your experience of so many years of working? What is the message, if it's of hope or ideas? What would you share? Essentially, this is a non-medication approach. Right now, our culture is dominated by pharmaceuticals, and I think that you should use this method first, and then, if you need more, then go to the medications. But today, people are just medicated immediatady and often, and that has a concern in terms of addictions, because if your dad smokes cigarettes and your mom uses over-the-counter drugs, as a kid, you're likely to pick up, taking an outside remedy is what I need to do to get better. Okay, when you're a kid, you may choose marijuana, you may choose heroin, something else down the line. And so people need to learn that they have the repertoire of resources within them. This work is just bringing out what's already in you instead of supplying an external source. Now, I'm not saying you should never use medications. There's a time and place for it. I think they're overly used and abused and sometimes used for suicide, actually. So this is a non-medication approach that actually, in many cases, appears to work faster than the medications themselves, except for Xanax. I haven't been able to do it as fast. Nobody works at the speed of Xanax. Xanax is pretty fast, but most all the other ones just works faster. And anyway, so that's one thing I'd like to say. It's an option for people that want naturalistic means. Yeah, and the message you said too was that that there's a lot of resources. Anybody can agree on that. I think we need that reminder, and you're giving it to us. There's so much resources within we don't even know about or can dream of. And really what you're doing is trying to figure that out. How do I do it? The way you do it is through the eye stimulation through colors, but at the end of the day, you're trying to find the resources within.
Right, absolutely.
So if people wanted to find you, so they can find those resources within, where would they look? Where would they go?
Well, I have a website, of course, and my name is Dr. Stephen Vazquez. I think if you just look the name, it'll show up. But I'm at, email is steve@ETT Austin. Is where you find me as far as the emails are concerned. In Austin, Texas. And I do come to other places from time to time, but a lot of people come from different places. I just got the furthest one today. I got an email from somebody that wanted to learn how to do this who was in Kenya, Africa.
Kenya?
Yes, this just came today. But I've had people come from all over the place. People come from Europe. Of course, they're end of the line extreme cases that end up at my door sometimes, but been successful with those. So I guess that's why they do it.
Yeah, it's powerful work. Well, Dr. Vazquez, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. I was glad to share the time with you and the color and the light.
Thank you.
So again, Dr. Vazquez, ETT, Emotional Transformation Therapy. And you can obviously Google him, look him on the website. We'll make sure that you have his email and information to contact him if you want to. His books are on Amazon. He's got 3 out that really teach about the method. And of course, he offers trainings as well. And as always, thank you for being and watching our show.